Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to the Memoirs of Color panel. I'm Dan Mazur. I am one of the directors of MICE, and this is my first time reading the spiel this weekend, so I'm in the daze. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank, first of all, Cagen, Malaka, Gill, and Bren for being part of this. I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to thank the university, our new host for MICE. This is MICE's 13th year annual show. We even found a way to continue on during the last few years of the pandemic in one form or another. But our first year hosted by Boston University, and not coincidentally also the first year that Boston University's School of Visual Arts has started a new graduate program in visual narrative. And that's what we have. If you're wondering, visual narrative is what you have to call comics if you're running a graduate program. And this also happens to be run by a wonderful cartoonist and educator named Gill, who is sitting in the center here. So if you think that sort of program would interest you or anyone you know, please check it out. MICE is produced by the, want to switch to that next slide? Down button, yeah. BCAF, Boston Comics Arts Foundation, is the nonprofit umbrella organization that produces MICE. It's a 501c3. And it's a charitable organization that funds comic arts festivals, individual artists, and educational programs for the greater Boston community. If you like what we're doing here, you can support or get involved by making a donation. Just ask at the welcome desk. And looking ahead, think about volunteering at MICE in a future year. Help us put on the show. It's a lot of fun. So with that, I will give it to Cagen.
Thank you, Dan. And welcome everyone to Memoirs of Color. I'm really excited to be here at MICE, finally back in person here in a new space at Boston University. It's very exciting. And I'm also very excited to talk to these amazing artists. The Memoir is near and dear to my heart. My series that I author is Lunchtime Comics, and that's also kind of an autobiographical memoir style comic. So I really love that kind of storytelling. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists here today. First, Malaka Gharob. And if you want to just say a few words about yourself and
Sure.
Introduce yourself.
Is it sun? Yes, hi. Hello everyone, I'm Malaka Gharob. I'm a cartoonist, I'm a journalist, and I'm a writer, and I'm the author of a couple of graphic memoirs that you can check out at Table 35A. And I largely, I came into comics really late in the game, like in my 30s, and it's a wonderful new chapter of my life. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And also Joel Christian Gill.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joel Christian Gill. I am the chair of the MFA in Visual Narrative, the fancy way to say comics. I am a cartoonist and historian who also came into comics late. I have written 7 graphic novels. The 8th one will be out at the end of this year, or in May. It's with Ibram Kendi. I did the graphic novel adaptation for Stamped from the Beginning, which will be out. But mostly, we'll be talking about my book, Fights, One Boy's Triumph Over Violence, which is a story about my life.
All right, thank you. Oops. Did we lose Bren's? Oh, I'm having some problems with this. There it is.
There it is.
Bren.
Hi, I'm Bren Bataclan. I'm a Cambridge-based artist. I just live around the corner. And I mostly paint murals these days. And this is my very first graphic memoir book. So with the help of Malaka, I can't believe I'm the same. I'm just like in awe.
I can
with
believe
you
it.
guys. I just, wow. Anyway, I wouldn't be without her, so it's just fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're really glad you're here as well.
Me too.
All right, so I'm going to start by having each one of you, I picked out a couple of pages from your memoirs, and you can either read them or just talk about, what was the thought behind these pages. So we'll start with Malaka.
Sure. Should I just sit over here? Should I come up or something?
Whatever's more comfortable for you.
Maybe I'll just I'll just turn like this.
probably
All right.
you won't have
so
to turn
that-
around
Yeah,
if you go,
yeah, that's helpful, yeah. All right, so this is my new graphic memoir that came out last month. And my first graphic memoir is called I Was Their American Dream. It was about my identity, about my identity and relationship with being first-generation Filipino Egyptian American. And this book is not about identity, but it's more about a sense of belonging in a blended family in a part of the world that felt really foreign to me, the Middle East. And I'm going to read you the prologue of the book. Oop, I can't go too close, I think. Okay.
I'll do these.
Oh, sure.
You just tell me when to go.
The Rock. Ugh, how lame. Couldn't they have gotten me like a Polly Pocket or a Beanie Baby or something? I didn't get much notice from my dad that I had a new stepmom. Listen, I have something to tell you. What? Why are you only telling me this now? I met her at age 9 in my grandmother's garden in Cairo. Hello, ya Malaka. My name is Hala. Hi. I mean, assalamu alaikum means hi. I told Hala all about you. Hala spoke very little English. I have no idea what she's saying. And despite visiting Egypt every summer from my home in Los Angeles, I spoke very little Arabic. She's telling you she's excited to spend the summer with you. Sure, me too.
Oh my God.
It's possessed. All right, Hala has something for you. It's a stone. We made it for you. It has your name, my name, and your dad's. We drew on it with ballpoint pen. Isn't that neat? Yes. Merci, Hala. My first impression of Hala was that she was very pretty. She was 26, had auburn hair, tan skin, and hazel eyes. Like my mom, she was put together, but unlike mom, she was way more fun and playful. Come on, let's get some mango. Woo, my favorite. And here I am just kind of following them around. Observing her in the garden that night, Allah, I wondered, what would become of me and Dad now that Hala was in the picture? I would spend several summers trying to figure that out until I realized the real question wasn't how I fit into their lives, but it was how they fit into mine. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, Mr. Joel Gill. So these are, I'll just start with this page here.
So this is, so I'll just give you guys a little bit about the book. And the beginning of the book is, it was a conversation between me and my son. My son, who is 20 now, was 13 when we had this conversation. And I had just picked him up from school, and he had told me that there was a fight. And these pages are not sequential, which is why I'm not reading them. He had just told me about this fight that he had been in, or that he had witnessed at school. And so I started thinking to him, you know, I asked him, I said, Christian, have you ever been in a fight? And he goes, no. And so I think, like, all of the fights that I've been into, and I need to teach him how to fight. I'm like, this boy needs to learn how to fight. I got to help him protect himself. And so I thought about all of the hundreds of times that I'd been in fights as a kid, and all of the things that were happening in my life around those fights, which was sexual abuse, emotional abuse, trauma, poverty, racism, like all of these things that were happening. And so I'm like, I have this pause, like in the car while we're driving, and I think about all those fights, and then I just turn to him and I'm like, you don't have to fight. I fought enough for the both of us. You're good. And he's like, good talk, man. So if you go to the next one, and one of the first, this is probably the second fight that I remember. There were these kids who don't have names in the book, but they were actually named Mike and Mike. They were these redneck kids. I grew up in the South. And they used to chase me home from school every single day. And then one day I went home and my mom was like, if you come home crying again, I'm going to beat you so that they will not. So I had to figure this out. So I couldn't go home crying again. And so they caught me after chasing me into the woods, and I found a pop bottle. That's, for you guys that don't know, pop bottles are what we used to call these soda bottles in the South. So I picked up a pop bottle and I fended off the redneck boys. And they never bothered me again after that. And then, so one of the things that used to happen when I was a kid, and this, if you grew up in a black neighborhood, I don't think this happens in white schools or predominantly white places, but we called it joning, but it's roasting, right? That's just the game that everybody plays, right, at the at table. And I hated it, right, because it would always devolve to like talking about my mom or my dad. And so in the pages leading up to this, I'm talking about school in general and how there were lots of places in school where I definitely didn't feel like I belonged. One of the scenes before this, I'm talking about the teacher in my kindergarten class around about the time that my father was died, they were asking me to draw what I wanted to be when I grew up. And at that point in my life, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I'd never even thought about it. There was no space in my life, in the midst of everything that was happening to me, to talk about what had happened. And so I drew a fireman, because I remember thinking clearly, I'll just draw a fireman. That's what kids want to be, right? So I drew a fireman. And then later we're in the playground, and we used to play all these random games. And so some kid, they were doing that game where they were talking about people's mama, and somebody talked about my dad, and it was like, oh, his daddy's dead. And so I got really angry. And I remember chasing a kid with the tennis racket and beating him up with the tennis racket, because in my opinion, instead of becoming the fireman, I became the fire. And so that's what the culmination of this page. So instead of becoming a fireman, I became the fire. And then this was about me growing up. And I had really terrible, so not my whole childhood wasn't bad, but most in fights, most of it is, right? And so in this page, I'm just talking about how I grew up, and I got really big over the course of the next couple of years, so people couldn't bully me anymore. And then the family that I had to stay with, my grandparents had this defunct farm that had no longer been running when I was a kid. And so I left, and I was staying with family members who were abusive and terrible and horrible. And so instead of staying in the house with them, I would just leave. So like I spent most of my time in the woods, like randomly fishing at this pond, and just staying away from the house. So this was about me, like growing up and basically becoming independent. Mm-hmm. So I think that's it, right?
Yes, it was.
Hi, I'm going to sit here because I'm right in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'm also just going to describe the pages instead of reading them. So my book is mostly about my mom, but it also touches upon my immigration story. So I have a traveling exhibit about my voyage from the Philippines to the Bay Area, San Francisco. So what I did is I took some of the paintings, and they became pages of my book. And my exhibit is called Kulap, which means fog in Tagalog. And so Daly City is perpetually foggy, so it's the fog of my experience, everything new, and it's also the literal, about being engulfed in fog. Next, please. Okay, my book deals about my mom's mental health issues. So she was a hoarder, and I took drafting all throughout high school, so I'm aging myself. So that's a floor plan of her apartment where we used to live. And those kind of mounds, those were the laundry that she accumulated. If you see the cover of my book, it's a whole bunch of mounds. I was buried in the mound. If you see the cover, that's my literal experience. And there's a portion of Malaka's first graphic memoir where you draw these Filipino things. That's inspired by that page. Next, please. So these were her mounds and how I sort of analyzed her possible mental health issues in mound format. Next, please. And this was me when I was about to get married. So I called her and I said, oh, Mom, I'm about to get married. She said, good, you're almost 30. So, and I told her that I was good, my husband and I were going to get married, and she asked, said, going to be Catholic? I said, yes. And then she said, okay, we are all going. And I said, Mom, I'm marrying a guy. I said, doesn't matter, just as long as I'm Catholic. So they all came. So, and we were, so that's my mom. She had a lot of issues, but she was a great friend. She had no maternal skills, but she was a great gay ally. Next. Yeah. All right, so this is about the Filipino cultural part. This is when Bob first joined our big family vacation. And so I didn't tell him that all my brothers, sisters, their spouses, and kids were just going to be in one suite. And so that's how Filipinos kind of hang out. We haven't seen each other for years. So he thought we were going to have our separate room. But no, so this was the very stages of his facial expression. I was telling him that, that we will be in the same bedroom as my mom, and they should be thankful that we wouldn't be in the same bed, because my mom wouldn't mind snuggling with us. So this was Bob's stages of, yeah. So it's mostly funny, but there's some serious aspect of it. Are there more pages, or this is it? That's it. Perfect, thanks.
That's awesome.
And those were some small samplings of their books. I got a chance to check out all of these books, and they're all amazing, and I definitely recommend you pick them up. Starting with a first question for all of you, and Joel, you kind of got into it a little bit, but what made you decide to tell this story, use the memoir format, and tell such a personal story about yourself? I mean, there are so many stories we can tell, but each of you chose to tell, personal stories. So what made you do that? And I'll start with you, Malaka.
Oh, with me?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Well, should I talk about my new book or old book? Doesn't matter. Okay, all right. So the first time I wrote a graphic memoir, it was called I Was Their American Dream in 2019. And it was basically a reaction after the Trump administration with how I was trying to deal with all these new narratives about immigrants in the media. There was a lot of negative rhetoric about immigrants trying to come into this country and trying to, this Muslims are terrorists narrative came up again. And I just felt like it totally did not match the way that I was raised in America in Southern California. And it didn't match the values and ethics of my family. And it didn't really match the story of my family either. So I almost wrote the book to course correct the narrative that I'd heard. And while I was course correcting, I realized for the first time that I actually didn't know anything. I didn't have a relationship with my Filipino or Egyptian side. I'd spent most of my teens and 20s trying to repress that side of me in favor of whiteness. And that was enforced by my Filipino family, who also thought that white was right, and my Arab family, who thought that fair skin was like the best thing that you could possibly have in this world. So I also had to push back on their own beliefs and about whiteness. And of course, in doing that, I learned that it's mired in so much history. So for example, Spanish colonialization or American colonialization in the Philippines, where Filipinos were taught that white people, whatever they did, or fair-skinned people, were more valuable than dark-skinned people, et cetera, et cetera. And I went through this journey. I wrote this book so I could untangle how I felt about my race. And then my second book, It Won't Always Be Like This, which came out last month, is basically, as I said, it's not really about my relationship with my identity. It's more about the sense of belonging that I wanted to feel with my blended family. And unfortunately, the context of that was that I was trying to survive in this blended family in a totally different part of the world, in the Middle East, which is one of the most, private and misunderstood cultures of the world. It's, there's not very much representation about the Middle East. We're starting to get that a little bit more now with Arab American families, with Rami and Mo, TV shows like that. But I came from an all-Filipino context where I grew up with people like my uncle, who's here, Tita Maro, with people with my uncle in Southern California, and then getting dropped in like a hot potato in the middle of Egypt or like Qatar, and then trying to understand the social norms of my dad's Arab Islamic family. And I didn't grow up there, so I just sort of had to figure it out as I went. And make relationships with my new siblings to boot. So yeah, those are a little bit about what the story. I wanted to write that story because I spent so much of my childhood in the Middle East, almost every single summer, and I wanted to know how it changed or affected my worldview. Yeah.
Very interesting. Joel, did you have more to say about that?
So, I originally started drawing comics because I was trying to tell my story. And I had started with this really fictionalized version of my life and trying to tell that story. And it was a complete and utter failure. Sometimes you got to get knocked down and get up. And it was really interesting because I had a friend who's actually here, Jesse Lonigan. I don't know what tables he's at, but he's great. But he looked through the pages of the thing that I was drawing. He doesn't remember this, and he goes, "I'm 50 pages into this, and I have no idea what I'm reading." I went back to the idea of how to draw stories and try to how to learn stories, and so I ended up drawing a lot of history. I did Strange Fruit Volume 1 and Volume 2, which were short stories, and then Tales of the Talented Tenth were long biographies. And after that, I think it was around the time I started, I think I read a couple of books that actually were the impetus behind fights. One was Raina Telgemeier's Smile, which is really crazy. that Fights is inspired by Brandon Telgemeyer's Smile. And the other one was Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And Ta-Nehisi Coates and I are about the same age. I'm from Southwestern Virginia, he's from Baltimore, so a lot of the culture is really similar. And he talked about being a young black man in the time, like in the middle of the crack boom, in a way that I hadn't thought about it. When I was teaching at another college in New Hampshire, I remember there was a mugging at the college. It was like we had 500 students, and over 10 years there was like 2 muggings or something, really small. And they were like, but this is serious because someone's pulled a gun. And I was like, I had guns pulled on me all the time. And you could hear it pin drop. Like everybody stopped. And I was like, oh shit, that doesn't happen to everybody. So I realized like it was that moment that thinking about that and then reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and like if you haven't read the book, the book is really it's a call and response to James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, where James Baldwin was writing about his nephew, a letter to his nephew, Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing to his son. And he's talking about protecting the black body and like how at every point in your life you're going to have to protect your body. And so he said things like, you don't go to a place without enough people with you because you might get jumped. And there's certain parts of town you don't go to at all because they shoot over there. And it was just like, that was just like something that was such in the back of my head. Like it was just natural. You don't go to this mall if you're by yourself. And there's a party down there and the girls are dope, but also people will shoot. So you don't go there, right? So like I had never thought about it in those terms because you just internalize it and you just never do it. And so having that conversation with my son and then thinking about how the plot device in Raina Telgemeyer's was dental work. And I was thinking about in my life, like it's fights. And I fought a lot as a kid. But thinking about like why I was fighting as opposed to just thinking, because a lot of people look at kids that grew up like I did and they think these are throwaway kids, like these are psychopaths or these are terrible. But you have no idea what that kid who's acting out in class has gone through before they get to you. And so I wanted to show people what it was like for a kid like me. And so I tell people a lot of times that Fights is a love letter to kids who grew up like I did growing up. And so the impetus behind that was to basically talk about that and also talk about sexual abuse because men, specifically black men, don't talk about sexual abuse a lot. And I wanted to make that a thing that we talk about because like I say, this is like a thing I say all the time, but our problems, we are unique, but our problems are not. And more kids need to hear that. And more people who grew up like I did need to hear that they are not alone in what's happened to them.
Very important stuff. Thanks, Joe. How about you, Bren?
All right. So when my exhibit had an opening, Kula, my immigration exhibit, I'm part of a Philippine-American book club here in Boston. One of the authors, Grace DeLucen, looked at my 17 pieces and she said, no, Brent, this would be great as a comic book. I just kind of laughed because I couldn't even conceive of having a comic book. So fast forward to the lockdown, and I lost all of my art projects, my mural projects. So I was basically unemployed. So I had 2 choices. One, to be the corner of our house in Cambridge, fetal, crying, unemployed, or try to find something creative to do. So I took Grace's advice by heart, and I turned, my husband was a high school teacher, and I turned our kitchen to a command central with all my Post-its, because I have a computer animation background, and I storyboarded. And so, I first embarked on an immigration-related exhibit, but for those of you who know my mom, have read my book, my mom was larger than life, and so from beyond the grave, she nudged me and said, it has to be all about me. So and so it turned to a book about my mom. So again, I had no intentions, and with the help of the Filipino writers community, I was encouraged, including again Malaka. So that's how it happened.
That's wonderful. And you know, there were some good things out of the pandemic, right? Not everything was terrible.
Yes.
A few good things came out of it, like this book. That's amazing. So I'm going to do something that you should never do when you public speech. I'm going to read a definition out of the dictionary of a memoir. A memoir is a historical account or biography written from personal knowledge or special sources. So memoirs are based on truth, but not always, right? Sometimes things are inflated or deflated. So I wonder, were there any points in your stories where you needed to expand the truth or reduce the truth in order for storytelling purposes, because life isn't always a perfect story, right? So were there any times that you had to do that? And I'll start with you again, Malaka.
Yeah, so I'm a journalist by day job. My day job is I'm a journalist, and so I have this real fixation for the truth, like finding the truth of things, of memory, and agreeing on some version of the truth. And I want to talk about my book process for It Won't Always Be Like This, my newest book, because it tells a story of a divorce and of patriarchal men and a woman in hijab and just these very, very sensitive topics within the Arab world, and then sort of like opening up those issues to the public. And in Arab society, that is extremely taboo. And so I wanted to make sure that my father and my stepmom and my 3 siblings, who I was going to be writing about in the book, they were all with me on this journey from the very get-go. And my stepmom doesn't speak English, and she's not on speaking terms with my dad, so basically I had to do a lot of groundwork and diplomacy to make sure that everyone was in. And in journalism, you don't want, when you say that you're getting consent from someone to write about them, when you mean consent, you need for them to fully know what it means to, I'm going to write about you. This book is going to be public. It's going to be available online. It's going to be using your name. People can come to a bookstore and read it. You might think that it won't show up in Egypt and your friends won't see it. Well, they can find it on the internet. A bookstore may carry it there. And I also, because I was relying on memories from my youth, I also wanted to run the memories by them, and sometimes I would bend my own version of the truth to make sure it corroborated with what my dad and my mom agreed with. That's like triangulating the facts like we do in journalism. So I wanted some agreed upon version of the truth that was closest to the truth, which is what we do in journalism, yeah. So for the book, I hired my little brother who's in college. I told him that I'd pay him $25 a chapter if he would read the book and translate the book for my stepmom, which he did paragraph by paragraph. I wrote a manuscript first, and then she would painstakingly go in and say, well, I don't agree when your dad said that, and I'm not talking to him right now, so you're gonna have to go and tell him that I don't like that part. So then I would be like the interlocutor and be like, Dad, so Hala read it, and she said that, and then I'd have Ahmed on the call with me, and like, okay, Ahmed, what did she say again? He was like my assistant. And I would have him sort of like bridge the gap between us. Anyways, this process went on chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter until I finished 50 pages of this manuscript of something that they all agreed with, and then I signed the contract to write the book with my publisher. And even after that point, once you turn prose into comics, it also has its own life. And I wanted them to be a part of that journey too. So I then again showed them chapter by chapter by chapter, and they tweaked and fudged things. And honestly, like, my family is more important to me than my art, so I'd rather maintain my family connection than write about something that they would hate me forever for. So I don't know. Yeah, that's just how it is for me personally. But that's my process.
That sounds like quite a process.
It was a long process.
Gotta love family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Bren?
Oh, wait, can you remind me what the question?
The question is, did you have to change any of the stories to make it work better as a story?
Sure.
So
one of the kind of challenges of writing this book was to portray my mom as a real person, but not vilify her at the same time. So it's this fine line. It was very, very hard. So there were pages from my book that I've illustrated, written, but I had to get rid of. So I had some people, including my husband, read it. So one that I thought would have been really great to add, but eventually kind of didn't include, I had to go to San Francisco for work, so I stayed with my mom to save money. But when I arrived, I had a really bad flu. This is pre-COVID. So I had really bad flu, and I got there, and I just pretty much went to bed. I fell asleep. And so the following day around 1 a.m., because that's just about 1 p.m., about the time she would wake up, I was just, in my bed, I couldn't get up, and I was starving. So my mom finally peeked in my old room, and she looked at me, and she went, ew, and she closed the door. So I said, oh my gosh, like, this is your cue to feed your son. Like, I was just called Domino's, and we live right next to a mall. She didn't even have a thought to, like, to buy food and bring it. So it was very funny that but it was really hard. I mean, like, who is this person? So again, she didn't have any maternal skills, and so I had fun drawing this, and but I didn't include it because again, I didn't want to vilify her, even though that was a big part of the book.
I noticed while reading it that you did a very good job balancing, your mother kind of going off to the left and, also being just like great to hang out with. I thought it was really interesting how you were able to balance that.
Thank you.
Obviously you put a lot of thought into it.
I appreciate that.
All right, Joel, how about you?
So I did change some names in the book, and I put things chronologically. And so there was certain times. So there's one character in the book, Rook. Rook and Bishop are both combinations of a couple of people, and their names are that. Rook and G Money are combinations of a bunch of people, and so I put them in there so that I didn't have to introduce individual people every time that I had it. Like, there's specifically with Rook, we got into a bunch of fights. Not all of the fights were him, but they were all truth. And one of the things that when I first started writing fights, I actually wrote the second chapter. That was the first thing that I drew. It was like one of my earliest memories, and so I drew that whole chapter. And I was at the Brooklyn Book Festival, and I think I was doing some press for Bessie Stringfield book. And James Sturm, who's a cartoonist and the director for the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont. He and I were sitting and we were talking about it, and he was showing me. I showed him what I had drawn, and he was, critiquing it and thinking about it. And he said to me, Joel, memoirs aren't biographies. Memoirs are, much more surreal than that. And so, and he's like, and what makes them interesting is how you lean into a memoir versus a biography. And like, just as an example, if you have read the autobiography of Malcolm X and read The Dead Are Rising by Les Payne, which won a Pulitzer, you can see the difference between how Malcolm X spoke his truth and how Les Payne found actual truth in what he was saying and what he found the truth, and it was oftentimes different. Doesn't mean that Malcolm X was lying about things, it's just that when you remember something, you remember it differently. I mean, how many times have you gone back to a house and remember the door being on the other side, or some like weird little thing that you just like make up in your head? Memory is different. And so I tried to lean into the memory, so I actually didn't do any research. I just drew it all as like my memories. I think there was only one time I asked somebody, and there was like, with the first fight that I get into in the book with the girl named Bebe, or Kiki, because it was at Bebe's house, sorry. So there's a project, so everybody had like ghetto names. It's just what it is, like Kiki, little man, like little man was a kid, Kiki, Bebe, anyway. So we were at Bebe's house, and and I couldn't remember what Bebe's boyfriend's name was that they get into a fight with, and so I asked my mom what was Bebe's boyfriend's name, and she said Moot. So that was the only thing that I asked people about, but everything else, I mean, I did like research for like places, like getting pictures of like the apartment complex that I grew up in, and like the truck my mom used to drive, like that kind of stuff. But as far as the story goes, I just drew it exactly as I remembered it. And just FYI, if you're interested in doing a memoir, I don't know if Cagen is going to ask this question, but I'm just going to tell you all this right now. You should be in therapy already.
Yes, that's right.
Because we were on a panel on Thursday night with Maya Kobe, and he said that you're going to be doing book reports about this thing for the rest of your life, especially if it's become successful. And I thought that was a really incredible way to think about it, because like you have to be able to not cry about it when you talk about it. And I talk about I put like with fights, I bleed on the page a little bit. Like I put everything out there. So you have to be right with what you're going to put out there. And so I just tried to live in those moments, which is difficult, but therapy helped me so that I wouldn't like every day was a blubbering fit. So.
Gotcha. Well, that leads me to my next question, which was, like, what was the challenging, what did you, like, these are, like I said, very personal stories, and dealing with some very personal trauma and parts of your life. So what did you find, was it challenging, like Joel was saying, to rehash these things, and you have to come on these panels and rehash it again. So was it difficult or challenging, or what was challenging about going back in those memories of those things that maybe weren't always quite so sunny?
The only thing that I found difficult, so as I was drawing fights, it was, and if you've read it, it's tough, right? It's like one bad thing happened to another. Like my editor was like, I just wanted to give little Joel a hug, right? Like you just want to pull him out and protect him. And so I was thinking about it, and you know, I'm gonna do a follow-up to fights at some point called I Wish I Could Draw What Summer Smelled Like, because that was like happy moments for my life. But there was one that was really, like the one thing that broke me when I was drawing fights is like, I'm gonna put some happy moments in here. And so I drew, so there's this whole thing in there with a Cabbage Patch doll, where if you grew up in the 1980s, you probably like remember there was this scare for the Cabbage Patch dolls were like possessed, and they were like always on television about them floating and killing people or whatever, right? Because it was like a big thing. And so my best friend Mike's little sister had a Cabbage Patch doll. That was absolutely terrifying. And there was this whole big thing through the book where we were talking about the Cabbage Patch doll, and we hid it on a porch, and we tried to light it on fire on the balcony in the projects, like ridiculous, right? And so I put that in the book, because I'm like, I gotta put some moments of like levity in here. And then the other thing was, when I would catch the bus in the mornings, when I was staying with my extended family, I used to have to walk up this dirt road to a church, and the church was at a crossroad. And at the church, if I was at the church, and for whatever reason, the bus driver, because in the South, everybody was related. I don't know if you know this, Malaka, but everybody's related, right? So, and if you're not related to somebody when you get there, you will be in 20 minutes. So the bus driver was actually my cousin. He was like one of my aunts, one of my my great aunt's sons, right? So he was just a terrible person, like just horrible. So if I was not directly at the stop sign, he would leave me. And I was like 8 or 9, right? So like I would roam, and so he would leave me. And so after leaving me a couple times, I decided to like get there an hour early so I could see the bus coming, so that I could always run to the corner. And so when I was doing that, there was another farm next to us. It was another black family that owned this like big swath of land, and they were the Charleses. And Mr. Charles would see me in the morning up there, and then Mr. Charles would eventually, he started doing like these really like nice things, right? He would have me come over and help him like keep cows from, like, you stand on that side, I'm gonna open the door, we need the cows to go this way. You stand right there and put your arms out, keep the cows going. So I would do that, or I would hold the doors open for his tractor. It's like little random, like little farm things, right? And you're like 8 or 9, that's like a lot of fun, right? And then one day I came up and he was giving me, he was feeding a calf. And I don't know what had happened, but the mother wasn't feeding the calf. And this was amazing, I was 8, right? So, and then after that day, when he was feeding the calf, he would just leave me the bottle. So I would come up and I would feed this calf. And then eventually it just disappeared, like the calf would disappear. And I just remember thinking to myself as a kid, Mr. Charles is a really nice man. Like, he's so nice. And then like the thing that broke me is that Mr. Charles wasn't a nice man, he was just normal. Like that's how people should treat kids. I was done for the day. I was crying, my wife's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, it's nothing, it's fine, I'll be fine. But that like legitimately broke me to the realization that I was thinking that somebody was nice when they were just regular.
How about you, Bren? What was the challenge?
The challenge, since I was airing dirty laundry with my family, I didn't want to be disowned by my family members. I wasn't ready for that. I'm talking about therapy. Like, I had many sleepless nights. I didn't know when I embarked on this project that I would have, nights when I just wouldn't sleep, because I didn't know how my family would react. I'm really close to my ate and kuya, my brother and sister, because, solidarity to deal with my mom. So we were really close. So one of the last things was to burn bridges, because their version of my parents are more idealized, because they grew up in the Philippines with my mom and dad, and they were more the typical, my dad worked, my mom was just at home. And so, but then when we moved to the United States, they were in their 50s already. And so, and my siblings got married, so I had to deal with both of my parents' mental health issues. So like their image of my parents are not the same as mine, so we had totally different like narratives. So I was really concerned, and so what I did was I kind of spoon-fed that, like I didn't share my mom portions of the book. I just kind of just shared more of the happier, funny sides of my book, and extended to my extended family. Like when my aunt saw the cover of the book, she kind of freaked out. Like, are you just gonna make fun of my sister and the whole family? So that was really hard because the cover of my book is a candid shot of my mom. So she was a hoarder, and when she passed away, we found a shoebox full of photos from like the 80s. So the challenge of being a hoarder is like, she didn't want anyone to see these photos, but she couldn't throw them away. So she duct taped it. But eventually I found this, I'm gonna keep this. I had no idea I was going to do, have a graphic novel. And so I used those photos, and and that was also very tricky because they weren't flattering photos of my mom. My mom was very photogenic, and like, she was really pretty, so those were the challenges, my family's reaction.
And what, just following up with that, like what was the reaction when they finally saw the finished book?
They're fine. They like appreciate it.
Oh, good.
So, yeah,
Good.
it's
Glad
good. Yeah.
How about you, Malaka? What was challenges that you had in writing this story?
I'll talk about my new book. I think I was like, my own stereotypes about the Middle East were challenged. I had a lot of judgment about my stepmom Hala, who wore a hijab, didn't work, and basically took care of the kids all day. And I mistakenly assumed that she was like this weaker person compared to my dad, didn't have a voice. And these were stereotypes that I had learned in the United States about Arab and Muslim people, about my own people. And because I was growing up in a Filipino family, who didn't know anything about the Arab world, I also didn't get a good picture of what Arab and Muslim people could be. And re-examining my history and re-examining the action of my stepmom in the context of her marriage with my dad, only then did I realize that her strength and power was the way that she expressed her strength and power and courage was so, she just did it in a different way. There were other ways that she was able to make a stand for herself and make choices and redirect my dad and have influence over the family's movements and decisions. And when I realized that, I felt really awful. I felt awful that I had made these assumptions about my own, my own religious background or my own ethnic background, and I had almost drunk the Kool-Aid, and I just didn't know. I just wasn't aware. And I finally had a conversation with my stepmom after the book was done, and I just apologized to her for thinking that she was not seeing this version of herself that was always there because my own judgments were clouding it.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, I would like to open up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to give you all an opportunity to ask some questions of these amazing authors, if anyone has any questions. No? Okay.
That's never happened before.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, there's one in the back.
Well, it's not a question. I just wanted to thank you for, I think there's a lot of brave courage that comes from soul searching and writing these stories and putting out the memoirs. I know we all of us have stories inside us that we just keep. I just wanted to know, before you did it, was there any apprehension? And then after you did it, how did you feel? Was there some kind of, I don't know, like therapy, was there some sort of release in sharing the story? And kind of how did it change you from before making the decision to go on the journey and after you've done the journey, published it?
anything you put out? Where did you jerk off?
Great question.
I don't think so I was terrified about putting the book out into the world, you know, because it's, you know, you have to be very vulnerable. There's a quote that I say all the time that I think is really sort of apropos to this kind of thing, is like, you grow in the broken places. Sometimes you got to break in order to grow. And so for fights, that was what it was like for me. It was like putting that out and being terrified. I don't know if I got anything out of it specifically, like from my own point of view. It was more about, you know, telling a story that some other people could relate to. It was more about that. It was more about, you know, this is my art, this is what I do, this is how I create, this is my creative instinct, and then creating something that I think could help people was important. So I wasn't necessarily cathartic in that response, because that came with the 20 plus years of therapy, right? That's what the therapy is for, not like if you think you're gonna draw a comic and feel better, I'm gonna tell you it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. You need a professional to walk you through this stuff. So yeah, it was more about like putting it out for other, like I tell people all the time that it was a love letter to kids who grew up like me. So that's probably the more important thing for me.
Any other responses?
So for me, one thing that I didn't expect was that my mom she doesn't feel real right now because I had to write about it, so it's almost like fiction. So I need to bring her back. I have to have like a more real relationship with her again, because I didn't expect this to happen when you're writing about someone. So no, this was a very cathartic experience, and it's great to sort of put her at a distance. It's a way for me to deal. So she passed away already. So in a nutshell, I wouldn't have been able to write this if she was still with us. But what's funny is she would have denied everything. But if eventually she would realize it was all about her, she would grab this mic away from me and then she would sit here. So yeah.
I guess for me, I didn't realize how much my younger siblings needed this book. When I published It Won't Always Be Like This, the new book, they each called me and they said, they like were crying, and they were like, this is like such a beautiful accounting of our family story. Like, I think there was a lot of, spoiler, my stepmom and my dad end their marriage at the very end of the book. And Hala kind of disappears and leaves the kids with my dad. And there was a lot of anger there for what had happened. But for the kids, it felt like they remembered all the good parts of what it was like to be in that family. You know, for the 17 years that my parents were married, my dad and my stepmom were married, we had a lovely little life, like for better and for worse. There were good times and there were bad times. And it's easy when something traumatic happens to only remember the bad times. But there are also some good things in there too. And that is the part that can't be erased. It will always be there. And that's what I wanted to document in the book too, the joys and the pain of what it was like to be part of that family unit, but I was able to crystallize that family life, you know, within the confines of the 224 pages of the book. And I'm glad to have some preservation of happiness for all of us to remember, each one of us in our family to remember that we were once happy together as a family.
It's so interesting how much perspective deals with memory, right? Like you were saying that your siblings had a different perspective of things because they grew up in a different way, and your siblings had a different perspective of things because they grew up in a different way. And we all see things through our own lenses, which is what makes memoir so darn interesting. Stephen?
Yeah, one question I had was about the visual aspect of your stories. Is there, you know, Bren, you said that you mostly do murals, not comics. How did you guys approach the visual style for a memoir? Is there any particular changes to your normal visual styling, or even is there just any particular little artistic decision you made that you're still like, oh yeah, I really like that bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to say that I wasn't. I came into comics really like late. I was always a doodler. I was a diarist, and I would doodle around the edges. And so I had a lot of imposter syndrome about like, ugh, I don't think my drawings are very good. But honestly, the best comics, like Liana Fink, who I'm sure you know of, the New Yorker artist, she's able to just draw scribble, and you're like, wow, that's Donald Trump really mad. You can just like tell, like, you know what I mean? And that's the best thing about cartooning. It's like, can you show emotion with the stroke? And so I kept reminding of myself that while I was drawing my books, is that I may not be the greatest illustrator in the world. I certainly came into it late, but as long as I can use the most emotion I can to express myself, then that's all that matters. So that's been my MO for the past 6 years that I've been doing this. And my cartooning has certainly become better. Like now, after drawing hundreds and hundreds of pages, I can say that like, wow, my drawings definitely look better than they used to. And I just picked up computer drawing like a few years ago too. So like I'm still like, I would always use pencil and paper, but now I'm getting a lot better at using that. Yeah.
I just want to bottle that so that my students can hear that. I don't know. I don't have a different style. I just draw, and I don't draw naturalistically. Like I actually graduated from BU with a degree in MFA in painting, so I don't paint when I don't do that. It's definitely cartooning. But it's expressive drawing. But one of the things that I think most of the people, like the questions I get asked most of the time is how I use symbols. So for example, for racist stereotypes or racist language, I use symbolic language, right? I use a symbol of a racist caricature for black people that's a stand-in for the N-word. And when black people actually say it in my book, they actually say the word. As like a dichotomy between like when white people say this word, specifically in the context that they're saying it, there is a history behind it. But when black people say it to each other, it's just a word. That same history is not involved in it. So like those kind of things, and I do it in Strange Fruit as well, where I had racist language for slurs for Native American people were in there. So I try to do that a lot, it changed. I mean, I think it's been consistent over the last couple of years, but it used to change a little bit. I would draw it differently, and I was like, oh, I'm just drawing again, and I like look back on it, I'm like, that was way different than I did it the first time. Like Malaka said, like the more you draw, the better you get at things. I always call it like visual shorthand. Like you get to a place, because comics is really, it's really like, I don't think people realize we're marketing like 1,000 drawings as one thing. So like if you were drawing t-shirts, it would be 1,000 t-shirts. If it was paintings, it would be 1,000 paintings. But it's like you're doing all of this work for one thing. And so that means you cannot spend, most of us cannot spend like hours and hours and hours trying to make sure that every vein is on that hand. We can't do it. Also, nobody cares. Yeah. Right? Like nobody's gonna look at the hands in a comic and be like, wow, that hand is not perfect. Because if you do that, and if you find yourself doing that, you're actually no longer thinking about the story. And so like anytime that when you're drawing comics, anytime you're drawing and you draw something, whether it's too beautiful or too primitive or terrible, if people notice those things, you have failed as a storyteller. So you have to walk this really fine line. And style is, KT over there said this when we had, one of my former students said this over there when he had coffee, that style was what happens when you're too lazy to draw something. And I love that idea, because that's what happens in comics, is that's what you do.
My background is actually in computer graphics. I moved here to teach computer animation and graphic design at UMass Amherst. But after years of doing that, I realized I didn't like it. I wasn't very good at it, and why was I teaching it? So about 20 years ago, I turned off my computer, so I started to paint, and now that's what I do. And I visit lots of schools, and I show kids how to draw my characters. I tell them that I was never the best illustrator in elementary to high school, college. This is what I could do. And the kids can mimic my characters, they can draw it, so they feel empowered. So I illustrated my graphic memoir exactly the way I just naturally draw. So, and I hand-drawn all of it, and I just imported it in Photoshop, and I added the colors. So they're all hand-drawn.
I would just like, just to add
What?
just a little bit more to that, like, I just want to say, like, just to add a little bit more to that, like, cartooning is an expressive drawing. And have you ever noticed, and I've said this before, but you ever notice how, like, everybody wants the thumbs up emoji to be the color that they are, but they never complain about the smiley face. Everybody's okay with the yellow smiley face, right? And you know why that is, because as simplified as that image is, we see ourselves in that. And I think that that's okay. And so, like, that's what, you know, like, people draw amazing comics with stick figures. It's okay. Just, you know, like, don't think you got to be able to draw all of, you got to know exactly how two-point perspective works. You don't have to. You don't have to.
Here, here, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can make comics.
Anybody can make comics.
Absolutely. Well, we're down to the last couple of minutes here. We don't have any time for any more questions, I'm sorry. But I wanted to give them all the chance to say, like, give a piece of advice to someone who's crazy enough to embark on a memoir project, besides get therapy first, of course, and tell us what you're working on now, or what's your next project. And I'll start with you, Malaka.
Sure. I would say that it's never too late to draw comics. If you have a passion and interest for it, go for it. I mean, I was in my 30s when I started, and now people think I've been a lifelong cartoonist. Nope. Only picked it up recently, and if I can do it, you can too. Yeah.
And what are you working on next?
Oh no, I'm not working on anything.
Okay. You just finished.
I just finished the project. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I feel like I'm always working on something. I just finished
Several things.
I know, right? I just finished a book with Ibram Kendi. So I did the graphic novel adaptation for Stamped, which will come out. I'm really glad you guys will see the fart jokes that I put in Stamped. So I actually texted him. I'm like, thank you for letting me put fart jokes into your history tome. And I'm working on a book with Don Lemon right now about his life. So I'm meeting with Don on a regular basis and doing that. And as far as making comics go, there are two types of people in this world when it comes to making art. There are people who talk about it and people who make it. Which one are you going to be?
Bam.
I sort of had a forced fellowship because I was, you know, during the lockdown, I was unemployed. So if you have time, and we don't have a whole lot of time, just work on it. So if you have passion to write a graphic memoir, just do it and don't wait. Given the opportunity to work on a new comic book, it would be how new wave music has saved me as youth. You see my 1983 shirt. So if I had the chance, that's what I would do as a teen in San Francisco. And just a little plug, I'm only going to be at the Millionaire Picnic for an hour. So if you're interested in getting my book, I'm only there for an hour. So thank you.
Great. Awesome. Well, I want to thank all our panelists, Joel, Bren, and Malaka, for this great panel and sharing yourselves and your work here today. And thank you all for coming out and seeing this panel. My name is Cagen Luse again, and thanks for coming out to MICE. Lots more programming coming up. And tomorrow we're also doing a Comics in Color meetup.
Oh, I have one.
It's out there. We're just for artists and enthusiasts who enjoy stories of color. Thank you, Coleman. 12:30 tomorrow. Right? I think that's the date. But yes, so thank you all very much, and a round of applause for our panelists, and enjoy MICE.